us have probably heard about the rising discussion around concussions. So whether it's posters in our school or new rules and regulations in sports that we watch, I think we've all kind of heard about it a little bit. Football, I think, is the most familiar to everyone, with new rules about how to tackle and things like that, or players coming on TV and talking about it. Well, the sport I'm talking about today is hockey. So hockey's known for its kind of fighting culture and aggression, whether it's checking into the boards or actually full-on fighting. So there's been a lot of argument about whether or not fighting should be banned altogether from hockey. Today, I'm going to explain to you why the NHL will not ban fighting anytime soon. So first, fighting is ingrained into how the sport of hockey is played itself, whether it's the rules or what they call the code, the unwritten rules. Second, the players themselves aren't interested in banning fighting at all because of its important role in player safety, actually, instead of hurting the players themselves. Last, I'll talk about how there's too many other changes that come along with the ban of fighting that the NHL would never follow through with. First, fighting is part of the written and unwritten rules, so like I said, it's called the code, and it's acknowledged sport-wide. There's books written about it and everything like that. The purpose is to keep quote-unquote reckless players from hurting skillful or valuable players on the team. I talk about this a little bit more in detail when I talk about the players' feelings towards it, but there's kind of a respect and honor code throughout the sport and among the players for these unwritten rules that revolve around fighting. The Bleacher Report came out with an article on the topic explaining players know that if they level some kind of hit on another player, especially a star player, they have to be ready to step up and accept a challenge for what they did. If somebody takes a shot at one of your guys and it appears to be even the smallest bit dirty, count on the team swarming the offending player to exact some type of revenge. When it comes to the actual written rule book, they're called fisticuffs in the rules, and so where in a sport like baseball, fighting would result in a suspension. In hockey, it's just a 5-minute penalty for both players, but they cancel each other out, so gameplay goes on, kind of like nothing ever happened. The only new rule that came out since all the concussions started getting talked about was that there's what they call the instigator rule. So if somebody starts a fight with another player that they think the other player is reluctant, then that instigator gets an extra 2 minutes in the penalty box. On the second point, addressing how players think about fighting in the NHL. According to a poll conducted by CBC Sports, which is a Canadian sports channel, 98% of players do not want to get rid of fighting. They talk about how fighting is part of the game and strategy. So one point in that is self-policing. Trevor Daley from the Pittsburgh Penguins told ESPN, "I don't think fighting is a bad thing. I think because there's fighting, there's always a form of respect out on the ice and that the game has. It makes our game what it is today. We have people and well-respected people, and you don't get away with too many freebies out there when you know there's a chance you might have to drop gloves and go with someone." In history, the NHL, there was traditionally certain people dedicated and recruited to be enforcers. So although it's dying out, this specific aspect of the sport, these so-called enforcers were expected to, now the so-called enforcers are now expected to be able to hold up and play up to the same level as everybody else. But historically, their role was to specifically instigate fights with opposing teams in retaliation for something like recklessness or cheap shots against their valuable players. We have to keep in mind when talking about hockey that hockey is dangerous in its innate nature. So not only is it a highly contact sport, the players are flying around at top speeds, throwing themselves against each other and against the boards in a really small space. So they have sharp blades on their feet and long sticks that are considered weapons. So that goes all into how they need to self-police themselves. So if players aren't conscious and careful, there could be worse consequences than a few fines or black eyes or even a missing tooth. Brian Burke from the Calgary Flames also told CBC Sports, "The amount of fighting in the game has reduced dramatically, and that's a good thing. It's not going to go up, but it's an essential part of player safety." So the last reason I don't see the NHL banning fighting is the proven domino effect that comes along with that ban. The perfect example for us to evaluate is Europe. So they banned fighting in their leagues. But the first big difference that came with that is that the change in rink size. So European ice rinks are 200 by 100 feet versus the NHL, which is 200 by 80 feet. That's a 3,000 square foot difference. So this was done because it results in a less physical game because there's too much ground to cover in order to maintain possession of the puck. So the NHL has a kind of finisher check mentality when they go and purposely hit other players, whereas in European hockey, there's a focus on skating and skill handling. So kind of piggybacking on all of that, the plays that they make are different. So the whole sport of hockey itself changes from the way they coach, the way that the players learn to play, and then the plays and drills that they run. So in conclusion, the NHL is not going to ban hockey. Fighting is ingrained in the culture of the game, the actual rule book, the players, and their self-policing and protecting mentality revolving around fighting that they count on as a fundamental rule. And last, the total elimination of fighting would bring along the necessity of so many other things that the NHL would not be able to follow through.
All right, Devin, you've done the same thing that I think a couple other people did the other day, and it seems like it's a natural instinct. People are hesitant to make an argument. They instead make it sound like it's an informative speech. You're going to explain to us why the NHL will not ban hockey. No. You shouldn't be explaining to us. You should be arguing to us. You need to tell us they will not do this. It's a declarative sentence. So avoid that kind of expository sort of introduction and stick with the declarative claim that you have as your purpose statement, and I think you'll be better off. There's a good preview of what the supporting structure is going to be in the presentation, so I think you did a good job there. And I especially like the opening, which kind of sets up the notion that there is some controversy on this. I think you might have mentioned, for instance, the European actions at the beginning, also to suggest that there might in fact be attempts to emulate what the Europeans have done, and that it's unlikely that the NFL will do this, or that they definitely will not do this. I thought you did a good job explaining the idea of a fighting code and how it works in the game and why it's perceived as being necessary to the way the game is played, at least in the NHL. You referred to the unwritten code. You mentioned the things that are actually built into the rules, and then you talked about a modification that exists, the instigator rule, to suggest that in fact this is really part of the game, and obviously there'd have to be a rule change to adjust to those sorts of things. I thought that you did a good job citing sources. You had NHL players, you had sports authorities talking about these particular issues. There's an interesting poll that you cite which seems to suggest that there's a lot of consensus among the players about the need to continue to have this as part of the game. So that seems okay. Your second point is nicely developed. It's like I said, it's simple, so it's not that complicated, but you had good information on it. You had the quote and the poll to go along with that. The third point on the domino effect, basically you're suggesting that there would be changes in, I assume that the change in the rink size in Europe is a result of having gotten rid of the fighting thing. I think that could be a little bit clearer that that's what was going on, and that it was a reaction to that. I think there are probably other parallels that you could suggest to other sports where it changed the sports dramatically, and there's maybe more resistance in hockey. It's a more traditional sort of sport, or it's harder for those changes to get adopted someplace, because you are in essence trying to make a claim of future fact. You're making a prediction about what's going to happen, and so we have to see that there is going to be strong resistance to this. If there's not a drive to get rid of it in the United States and in Canada, then we don't really have an argument here. But if there is a drive to do it, your argument is that it's going to be thwarted by the NHL and the players themselves. There's probably a little bit more reading than is desirable, but you finished efficiently, within the amount of time that you had, and for the argument that you're making, I thought you provided some pretty solid proof. Thank you.